when you look at those shows and you hear the music, I mean, it is really a caricature of just the worst aspects of popular music and especially rap. There's really not even much of a bass line. It's just bass tones. There's guttural sounds and panting and just phrases thrown out about sex and wanting to do this and that. And I know most rappers rap to like a backing track live, but even his lyrics were pumped in. He's basically up on stage just like dancing around with his friends. He's not even doing the rapping. The music itself, I know music is subjective, and we could go into a whole other conversation about this, but just to keep it brief, to me, it's like quicksand. It pulls you down. I know every kind of people, every kind of culture needs their catharsis, needs their cathartic elements of letting go and having their times when you kind of step away from regular day-to-day life. Okay, that happens in Europe as well. That is in our tradition as well. But there is nothing upward about it. Now, again, I know
Yeah.
music is subjective, but I've done some material. I have an article on my website and I had a long conversation. It's in my conversations playlist on my YouTube channel if anyone's interested. I had this with Carolyn Emmerich about the Faustian or the European spirit behind rock and roll. Now, maybe not everyone likes rock and roll. It's not the only genre I like, but I do love some classic rock. And I know it has its decadent elements. I know most rock stars are not people to emulate personally, but I still see in rock and roll more of an outward transcendental look towards the world, trying to rise up or trying to celebrate life. There's something more proactive about it. Or even if someone's going to argue with me and say everything I'm saying right now is subjective, then at the very least I could say it rings true with me. Whereas this kind of thonic, just bringing you down like quicksand, like this really guttural rap, you just look at this and you say like, this is our culture. This is what's happening. I feel like the video, if you go look at his videos of his live performances, people will watch things like this in 100 years. And it's either going to be, well, this was the death throes of Western civilization. This is what it was like at the end. Or conversely, and this is what we're hoping for, this is almost where we went off the cliff, but we reeled it in and now we're back. Because again, I have to be honest, I resent the fact that, and we know what it's about, but the Atlantic Monthly is writing about him and celebrating him, and I think even saying that he was some kind of misunderstood genius. It's like, this is not the kind of culture I want to live in, where our cultural institutions and so-called intellectual magazines are even talking about this.
The obscenity and vulgarity of the rock and roll music is obviously a means by which the white man and his children can be driven to the level with a nigger. It is obviously nigger music.
It's the same thing they said about rock and roll, and now they're doing it with hip hop. Definitely, it's the same thing. Trust me. Now, I have my little criticisms about what they said, based on me being a rocker and also into hip hop, and also being black. It doesn't matter what genre it is. It's because Faustian is black. They'll find anything and everything to criticize him about. And I'm saying this not even really being a fan of this young man. But the thing is, keep in mind, they have an agenda. And anything that has to do with black people and their agenda is negative when it comes to them commenting about black people in general. Now, first of all, I think it's kind of funny that whoever this guy is talking to Richard Spencer just has the nerve to, how could I say this? Have the nerve to basically try to say that hip hop is all guttural and that there's no positive elements, when hip hop started off as a positive alternative to those that were in street gangs to begin with. The Zulu Kings, formed in 1973, were formed as an alternative to a lot of the outlaw gangs that existed in New York at that time, like the Savage Skulls and the Black Spades. One of the gangs that were more actually formed even before the Zulus were the Ghetto Brothers. They went from being outlaws to being community activists. And even if you watch the movie The Rebel Kings, which I advise everyone to watch, they talk about how hip hop music helped the community to form more. They formed, and even after their comrade Black Benji was murdered, they still kept being peaceful and cleaning up the neighborhoods and all that. And watch that movie; it'll give you more detail. There's also another movie that came out about that particular gang, called Flying Cut Sleeves. Check that one out too. But I say that to say this: hip hop started off positive, and check this out. There were originally 4 elements, and this particular one has 5, and it's pretty cool. The first element was, of course, rocking the mic. Second element, breakdancing, and classically called b-boying. Third element, DJing, and that goes along with the sound systems that they used to battle with in New York at that time. And also graffiti, which earlier on, graffiti, a lot of people listen to all kinds of music doing graffiti. Cats like Blade and Scene, Lady Pink, but I can say that hip hop claimed graffiti as an expression of art. I'm not saying every graffiti artist listened to hip hop, but yeah, you guys get what I'm saying. But hip hop was the one that claimed this as an art because it was an alternative to what was going on in New York at the time. So this person basically is totally false in just the way that he comes at hip hop in general. He talks about guttural and hip hop being guttural and growling and grunts and all these obscenities were, well, there's tons of examples of this with like a lot of white rock artists. Don't pretend like white rock and roll, even though he kind of mentioned it, but of course he had to give his little slight and basically paint hip hop as if it's the enemy music. Well, of course for him it is. But let me give you an example of many examples of a lot of white rock artists that pretty much do the same thing that he was claiming that Exestacion does. G.G. Allen, this is G.G. Allen, by the way. G.G. Allen is one of the artists that most people would consider punk rock. He's known and notorious for basically like all kinds of stuff where he's beaten his audience members, he's raped some of his members, he threw excrements at the audience, he's cut himself, he's brutalized. I mean, a lot of people would just say, oh, it's theater and all that. And that's, how could I say this? I'm saying this not even being a fan of Exestacion, although I have to say this, I like some of the songs that I've heard sonically and just the energy when it comes to high energy music. I'm really into like a lot of abrasive type stuff, sound wise, not so much lyrics, because not all of this abrasive music has the most positive lyrics, but I like really, abrasive stuff. I liked what Exestacion, that song Sippin' Tea is an example. It's kind of got this sort of heavy metal, sort of abrasive breakbeat, that bass tone that he was talking about that he couldn't hear. It's funny because like he didn't say anything about like noisecore or death metal or grindcore music, which I actually like. I'm into all that stuff. So I'm speaking as a fan of that kind of music. And it's the reason that I like that Exestacion whenever Exestacion does that type, because he has a few different styles that he does with or did when he was rapping. He did the slow stuff and I wasn't really into that. I like the more abrasive stuff. Specifically that Sippin' Tea song is my favorite by him. Although I'm not into like any obscenities and anything like that. But to get back to this, that guy that was talking to Richard Spencer totally ignores that there's a huge aspect of this sort of guttural, noise type stuff that goes along with a lot of white rocker types too. G.G. Allin is one, and I gave you examples of what he did. This band, Cannibal Corpse, is one of many different bands that I'm going to name. I'm not going to go into detail about all these bands because I can be here all day. Cannibal Corpse is known, and I'm sure it's probably for shock, but I mean, you can't get away from the stuff that the issues and stuff. I mean, the subject matter is very blatantly perverted, and I won't even call it provocative. It's just straight up like almost like snuff type shit, you know, like it's really bad. You know, it's to the point where they have 3 of their albums, their first 3 albums, they cannot even perform. If they go to Europe, they have like people that know those songs, that I guess have them like, it's the songs are banned. So they have to basically like not play any of those songs. If they do, I think they get fined and like basically their show gets canceled. But they have titles like F with a Knife and all that stuff, and just, you know, Rip from a Virgin's CUNT. I mean, stuff like that. But yet, this white supremacist guy, that's what he is going to ignore that element in rock and roll music. We could talk about a lot of things within rock and roll music and also rock stars that go from everywhere from spousal abuse to straight up pedophilia, including Ted Nugent. So I don't know where he's talking about certain things, you know, like, and just blaming it on just black people, let alone hip hop, or vice versa. Because it can go both ways, trust me. And I know, because I've been into rock music most of my life. No, all my life, really, if you want to look at it that way. I've also been into hip-hop. Another thing he brought up that was interesting is this European Faustian bargain. Now, yeah, I know the whole story of Faust and all that, but when you think of that particular incident, that has nothing to do with rock and roll when it comes to Europeans. It has everything to do with rock and roll when it comes to black people, because the Faustian ordeal that happened actually was inspired by this man by the name of Robert Johnson. I don't know if any of you guys know the story of Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson was said to have sold his soul to the devil to get the gift of how he plays guitar. Now, you cannot think of the start of this so-called Faustian bargain outside of that, because that's where that happened, and that's where that element comes from in rock and roll. And if you don't believe me, I'm sure you could find different people that, like Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, that had an admiration for Robert Johnson, and just other acts like the Rolling Stones. A lot of these bands were influenced by that. That Faustian bargain was within rock and roll, was also started by a black person. It had nothing to do with Europe. So he needs to get back. I mean, like, seriously, like get back with that stuff. And I'm not parading or praising a Faustian bargain, because to me that's a negative with my spiritual beliefs. And it's funny that they look at that as a positive thing. No. Yeah, I mean, it's just, but even that concept within rock and roll comes from a black man. You know, Robert Johnson probably was the first within popular music in the West to give praise to Satan. I'm not lying to you guys. Not that I'm not praising it, because I'm totally not into that. But that's where that's where you can trace that back to when it comes to rock and roll and all that. You know? You cannot excuse that context. But these guys have their head basically like in their own world, to where they don't see black people, they just see their own thing. They don't, and everything that they claim to know about black history, they demonize. Hip hop started as a positive, and there's still elements of that even today. And to be honest, it's contemporary or its cousin, I would like to call it, punk rock, actually started off more as a negative, or some people would say nihilistic. Now, to me, nihilism is negative. I could understand where certain people come from and saying, well, they want to have a clean slate with the mind, but that's a whole nother conversation. Hip hop basically started off with idealism. Punk rock, which I am a punk rocker. I mean, I just showed you some of my pictures. That originally kind of started off with some kind of a nihilistic philosophy, But even within that, like there were certain bands that stood out. Bands like this band, the Bad Brains, which were not a nihilistic band at all, or known not to be, because they added an element of idealism, positive mental attitude, or PMA, as they would say. They pretty much like had the element of positive mental attitude that influenced a lot of different people in that scene, even to the point where there were movements like Posicore and Krishnacore, and even some of the earlier Christian punk rockers too. Granted, these guys are Rastafarians, so they brought that positive mental attitude within punk rock, let alone changing and being one of the forefathers of what they call hardcore, or the most known forefathers of hardcore punk rock, which was extremely fast and a little bit more abrasive than the original punk stuff. So shout out to the Bad Brains, one of my favorite punk rock bands. But getting back to hip hop, we've had positive influences within hip hop from the beginning. It was an anti gang thing, not to destroy, the group aspect of what gangs brought, but to put something positive and to turn the negative to something better, to where you're helping the community instead of hurting the community. Public Enemy was one of those that shifted the discourse from partying to forming a party for empowerment. That's definitely something positive. They were definitely anti-drugs. They were all about unification of all black people and just fighting against the evils of the world. Very positive message for that time too. You have rappers like Bus Driver. I'm not saying that Bus Driver has like so many different, he's not on no negative stuff. And not just because I know this dude personally, but his style, you got to realize, these people don't know about the diversity of hip hop. Hip hop is just as diverse as rock and roll. You have Freestyle Fellowship, another group that I think is amazing, rhyme style and just on some other kind of way, Great album right here. Kendrick Lamar is a modern version of how not only diverse hip hop could be, but also a positive aspect of hip hop music, there's Medusa, very encouraging to like a lot of females, especially black females. Tribe Called Quest, these icons of hip hop, they ushered in that jazz style of hip hop. Them and Guru, with Gangstar, Diggable Planets, and a few others. They were part of the Native Tongues group, which was on the East Coast, included Brand Nubian, Queen Latifah, Jungle Brothers, of course, De La Soul. And I think Moni Love was in the group as well. I show this to show these guys are ignoring these kind of groups. And it's not just these groups. There's a ton of them. I could be all day talking about positive hip-hop groups today and even now, Even mentioning somebody like Chance the Rapper, who has, he's definitely a positive, and not just on the mic, but also within the community. He's given to schools and just in other endeavors to help empower black people in the community. But no, these idiots don't want to talk about that. They want to focus on the negative aspects of hip hop. or just the more nihilistic, and then try to label us all that. And it's funny. They say the same thing that a lot of these white cats or white supremacist cats, because not every white person thinks like this. I myself have worked with a lot of different people with what I do, but they'll say that to just demonize black people as a whole, like they did back then with rock and roll. Rock and roll is our music. I don't care what anyone says, you guys. Yes, rock and roll is our music. It doesn't matter who's playing it. It began with us. Most popular music over here, if not all, began with black people. And, you know, you got these white supremacists like Richard Spencer and whoever this other person was talking all their crap without... here's the thing. Maybe they don't know, or maybe they just ignore it. They ignore the fact that there is black contribution and creativity. And that's the thing about these cats. They're delusional, and they choose to be delusional. Telling me that, oh, there's, you know, like all hip hop's gonna... No. Every music has that. Every music has that element to bring a person down or to lift people up. Especially hip hop. Hip hop started off lifting people up, and there's still that element today. And I'm going to say even rock and roll, yes, there's both. But definitely rock and roll is known for some crazy stuff. I know firsthand because I listen to some of these bands that have done some crazy shit. Sorry for cursing. I'm trying not to. Was doing good up until now. I'm just kidding. Anyways, I'd like to know what you guys think about this. And you see the devil standard, or double standard, I mean. Well, I mean both, of course. Yeah. So it's funny how this guy talks about as if he's an advocate of culture, and talks about classic rock as if it's so benign. Please, dude, you're being ignorant, and you choose to be. Yeah. Anyways, I'd like to know what you guys think about this. Peace.